This is the Tree of Life, Season 13, Chapter 1. In this episode, we will be talking about how the hierarchy of the bodily rhythms, or cycles, produces a series of simultaneous and oscillating hybrid structures. Now, in the complete series, we talked about how the bodily cycles or rhythms can be broken into a series of cycles which involve the consumption or excretion of particular substances. Although it is not always true that these cycles involve consumption, for the most part, what unifies them is the flipping of cycle from one phase to another. These various rhythms represent different modalities, apart from the 9 plates, but rather radiate through those plates concentrating or releasing particular expectations. Since in the last season, we talked about how rhythms can be relationally self-conscious, or self-conscious by need, we see that these two forms of self-consciousness reflect chiral variants of the same hybrid structure, and the movement through the rhythms represents the oscillation between them. Now, in other words, structures are chiral one side or the other depending upon whether they are in the ingestion phase of the cycle or the excretion phase of the cycle. Thus, one of these phases is described by negation and the other by affirmation of the particular need. From this we can see that the impulses represented by expression of consumption versus excretion are dialectical. More importantly, that in the ingestion phase the excretion is negated and vice versa with respect to the excretion phase. From this we see that, for example, starting with the breathing cycle, we see that the consumption of air is affirmed within the first phase and negated within the second. Whilst for the excretion of air, it is affirmed within the second phase and negated within the first. Thus, you can draw a tiered diagram for a person at any given time, describing each of the bodily rhythms as a set of paired hybrid structures with some other 2 individuals. Each variant on each level is a chiral opposite of the structure corresponding to the second phase of the cycle. So, for example, there would be the first order rhythm, namely the breathing rhythm, with 2 hybrid chiral structures corresponding to distinct phases of ingestion or excretion. Then, there would be the second order rhythm, namely the consumption of liquid, with distinct phases for ingestion or excretion. Then the third order rhythm for the consumption of food, with distinct phases for ingestion and excretion. Then the fourth order, for the sexual cycle. Now, each of these primary orders of the rhythms could be further broken down into particular, habit-forming substances, or necessary ingredients for consumption, i.e. dairy, meat, etc. Or even, broken down by the essential amino acids, carbohydrates, lipids. Likewise, the same could be done for addictive substances, namely, caffeine or cigarettes. But what we see is that different addictive substances are ingested distinct ways, such that cigarettes would be secondary to the first order rhythm, the breathing rhythm, and so on and so forth. In this way, it would be possible to develop an expansive table corresponding to the particular arrangement of cycles, their phases, and the chiral structures corresponding to those phases, for each rhythm. Now, what we also saw is that often these rhythms are linked as between 2 interacting people. For example, 2 people who share a meal together. Or 2 people who share a cigarette. Or 2 people who partake in the act of intimacy. But we also see that the breathing rhythms, for example, can be linked through what I call emotional coupling between 2 interacting or repetitiously interacting people. Which is to say, if there is some expectation of future intersection, pursuant to the satisfaction of some rhythm, either excretion or ingestion, then there is some hybrid structure describing those 2 individuals. In other words, every interaction between 2 people, that is, in the satisfaction of a common rhythm, represents a hybrid structure describing said interaction according to a particular order and chirality. That's the end of the podcast for today.